Now, we hear almost everybody talking in some way or the other about God and the soul and the mystery of the universe. But if we are in quest of one who has realized God or is acquainted with him, we will probably find none such among them. This is the reason why there are constant feuds among the representatives of different religions. They talk a lot, good deal about God, but inwardly they might be no better than a downright atheist. They acknowledge his existence in words, but at heart they seem to be totally unmindful of his existence. To them, the only utility of God is when they are in distress or misery. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಕಟ ಬಂದಾಗ ವೆಂಕಟರಮಣ distress or misery. ಅವಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ದೇವ್ರ ನೆನಪಾಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ದೇವ್ರ ನೆನಪಾಗಲ್ಲ. They expect him on such occasions to attend to their call to remove their troubles. They pray to him chiefly for the supply of their wants. It is really far from the idea of true love and devotion. A true devotee is one who loves him not for any favor or worldly interest, but merely for love's sake. Please underline that. A true devotee is one who loves God for the sake of love, not anything else. He always remains in a state of complete resignation to his will. A true devotee will be in a state of complete resignation to the God's will. He is perfectly contented with all that is bestowed upon him, whether good or bad, joyful or unpleasant. Joy or sorrow is meaningless to him. Everything is a boon to him from his beloved. Such complete resignation and unquestioning attitude in all matters is the highest form of devotion. Please underline this. What is the highest form of devotion? Complete resignation and unquestioning attitude in all matters. Resignation does not, however, mean that you should remain idle, doing nothing for yourself and depending all the time upon God, thinking that God will send him all that is he requires if he so wills. God helps those who help themselves is a common saying which is literally true. ಸೊ ಸನತ್ ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿರೋನು ಆಗ ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಕೂತ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾ ಅಂತ. ಅಷ್ಟರಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾಬುಜಿನೇ ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆಯ್ತಾ? We are failing in our sacred duty if we do not exert ourselves for the discharge of our responsibilities pertaining either to this or to the next world. So our own duty we should strive to do. We should not allow that also to be put on the master, that he should do it on our behalf. In other words, a true sign of the devotee is that they do all the things that they can do at their end, only then they invoke the presence of the master or the help of the master. That is a true sign of the devotee. If the devotee goes on putting everything on the master and seeking help for each and everything that they themselves can do, that actually means that they are burdening the master. And that they should not do. ಸರಿನಾ? ಈಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಒಬ್ರು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ, ಸಮ್ ಜೂನಿಯರ್. Each and everything they come and ask you, how do you feel about it? You will definitely tell them, can't you think certain things and do your things yourself? This is what you will tell. Exactly the same thing master will tell you. Can't you do certain things yourself? Okay. The only thing which should be borne in mind is that we work in accordance with the will of God and feel contented with the result, whatever it might be. When we come up to this level, we may rightly think ourselves to be true devotees of the Supreme Master and hence on the right path leading to reality. Reality is not a thing to be perceived through the physical organs of the senses, but it can only be realized in the innermost core of the heart. So where is God to be searched for? Reality to be searched for is the innermost core of the heart. It cannot be perceived by the senses. We have therefore to go deep into ourselves to solve the problem of life. We have in our mind an idea of this great universe, which is, as we all know, the material manifestation of God. Generally, we look upon it as Maya or illusion to distinguish from the unchanging absolute reality. So there are two things. There's one thing which is unchanging, which is the absolute reality. There's other thing which is changing, which is the Maya. People have tried to define Maya in numerous different ways, not perhaps without reasonable basis. It is really a godly power which has brought into existence the entire creation in its different form and shapes and which regulates its entire working. Please underline this. Babuji gives a different definition of Maya. What does he say? Maya is a godly power which has brought into existence the entire creation in its different forms and shapes and which regulates its entire working. We are all the while surrounded by this great power, and its effect is visible in all phases of our activity. We are whirling around within the glossy sphere of Maya, clinging at times to one or the other of the objects in view, thinking it to be the reality. That's what we do. We keep jumping from one thing to another, one person to another, one idea to another. That's all we keep doing. Or one samskara to another samskara. All of which are nothing but part of the Maya. Our senses, feelings, and emotions give it a new coloring and mold our actions accordingly. We remain entangled within the snare of Maya without any hope of emancipation until we divert our attention towards the unchanging reality at the root. This is exactly what you do when you come for meditation. Knowingly or unknowingly, the direction of your flow of the mind or attention is turned towards the reality. That's what it is done in every sitting, for every abhyasi. This vast circle of material manifestation, the direct result of Maya, is unlimited. In it, we go round and round with ceaseless motion like the rim of a wheel, even further and further away from the pivot. Just as every circle must have a center, so must this vast circle of manifestation have a center or base. If we are able to discover it, we may possibly find a clue for the solution of our problem. So if you look at Maya as a circle, it should have a base or center. All that we try to do in meditation is to try to find the center of the base. The whole of the science of mathematics rests upon the little base 0. Now for this limitless universe, we have to trace out a 0 or base from which all planes of existence have started. Again, the center of the circle, if observed minutely, is in itself another smaller and finer circle. As such, it must have another smaller finer center for it. The same process continues up to infinity. In other words, each of the finer and the smaller circles serves as the center of a bigger external circle. ಇದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಎಲ್ಲ ನಿದ್ದೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ?
ಇಲ್ಲ ಬ್ರದರ್.
ನಿದ್ದೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ಇದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತಾ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದೆ.
Yes, but I have a different question related to center only. If if I can ask that. So Babuji here says that it's an infinite like loop of circles continue constantly. But I've also heard him say about reaching the goal. Like there's a goal that can be reached. It's still an infinite ocean after that, but like it's the last circle anta ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. How is that possible is what I'm wondering because even that can have a center further.
ಆ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಸೆಂಟರ್, ಆ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಬಾಬುಜಿ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ನೋಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಈಸ್ ಪುಷ್ಡ್ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್. He's not able to go inside. But when he reaches that final circle, he gets an experience of the unchanging thing or the unchanging substance, which is called as the reality. That which is the base of everything that is in existence. Go ahead.
But that can also have a different base, right? That's the maximum that we could reach. And that's from, it's like a lens.
Unchanging reality, that what is reality? Reality is that thing which is permanent and unchanging. That is the definition of reality, absolute reality. When we reach that level, we have crossed infinite number of circles before we reach that particular level. That's all he is trying to say. Before you reach that particular level, you pass through an infinite number of circles. Each circle being having a center of its own, and that center being a circle for another center of its own, till you reach the reality. Once you reach the reality, this actually becomes redundant. Now, Babaji is talking about from the place where we start towards the center. Okay, he's not talking about starting from the center and going from there inside. From the place where we start, we go through infinite number of circles, which are like smaller and smaller and smaller, which each one has their own center, till we reach that particular center which is unchanging and permanent. Likewise, you can also have bigger circles. For every bigger circle, the previous circle is a center. So you can have infinite number of bigger circles also. So you can have infinite number of bigger circles. You can also have infinite number of smaller circles from where we are as of now. That is something to be remembered. Not from the center, from where we are. So as the circles become smaller and smaller, it is called as anoraniyan. As the circles become bigger and bigger, it is called as mahato mahiyan. These are two terms that comes in Upanishads. Anoraniyan, mahato mahiyan. So what is God? God is bigger than the biggest. God is smaller than the smallest. In both dimensions, he can exist. He does exist. That is what we talk about as a description of God. You got the point? The space can be as little as what we see right in front of me. That is a space. That is limited, but it can also be infinite. It is bigger than the bigger, smaller than the smallest. That is the kind of conception that we have about God. That is what Upanishad describes about the description of God. Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan. Anu means atom, finer than an atom. Anoraniyan, finer than an atom. Now we have gone to the subatomic particles and then we have quarks and various other things now. Right? And there we have the boson particle, which is called as the God particle. That seems to be the base. That is where science is heading. Science is also going towards that particle, which is the base, which is called as the God particle or boson particle. So whether we proceed externally or internally, we come to the same place anyway, in the end. Here we come to the same place by utilizing our own resources. There we come to the same place by actually investing so much amount of money and energy and so many other things. Here we come to that same place, same particle, just like that only, just by relaxing ourselves, just by going deeper into ourselves. Okay? So, anyway, so don't confuse about the center itself. The center that we talk about is the unchanging permanent state. Okay? But Babaji writes, who knows, human beings might next evolve to that level where they might be able to go into the center while living here and then see what is there in the center. That's also possible. Now that is the next level of spiritual research that needs to be done. Okay? So spiritual research is also not ended. It will continue. Thus, behind every solid material universe, there is another finer, more subtler universe, which is the cause or the center of the other universe. Again, for this finer circle, there must be another circle represented by a still finer circle, so on. Putting it in the other way, there may be innumerable circles, one after the other, round the unimaginable finest point, the center within each circle, in turn serving as the center of the next outer circle, till we come to the present solid state of existence. What we have to do now is to retrace our steps back from the present gross state of existence to the previous finer and smaller, still finer form up to the farthest possible limit of human approach. In our present state of existence, we are revolving around and round within the sphere of grossness. Our only hope lies in pushing our way right across towards the center or the root cause, crossing the finer regions one after the other. This is the essence of the spiritual science. Please underline that. The essence of the spiritual science is going away from the grosser states to the finer and finer states of existence. The root cause of the entire universe, from the finest to the grossest, is the innermost center or the base or the zero. We may call it as God or Brahman. The composition of a man also is exactly the same as that of the universe. Just as behind the solid external universe, there are innumerable other forms of finer and still finer type. So behind this gross physical body of a man, there are numerous finer and still finer forms of existence. The outermost form is the gross body or the Sthula Sharir. behind which exists the astral body or the Sukshma Sharir, and then behind that is the causal body or the Karana Sharir. So there are three Sharirs. So Stula Sharir, Sukshma Sharir, and Karana Sharir. Besides these three outer forms, there are innumerable other forms which are so fine and subtle that thinkers do not call them as bodies, but only as fine coverings around the soul. It is really very difficult to put a name to each one of them, which may be countless. With all these innumerable forms, from the finest to the grossest, man is in existence in this material world as a true copy of the universe, or the entire manifestation of God as represented by the complete circle from the outermost circumference to the innermost center or zero. So the entire thing can be man. ಆ 23 ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ 23 ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಇದೆಯಾ 23 ಸರ್ಕಲ್ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಚಾಪ್ಟರ್ ಗೋಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಲೈಫ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ ನೋಡಿ 23 ಸರ್ಕಲ್ So, 23 circle, all the 23 circles are nothing but a human. They have all these 23 circles within them. The entire universe also has these 23 circles. We also have these entire 23 circles. That is what it is. Okay. So, whatever is there in the macrocosm, it is there in the microcosm. We are the microcosm. Whatever is there in the macrocosm, the same things are there in the microcosm also. That is what it is. Now, the innermost center zero of the man's existence and that of God's manifestation is really the same. So, the innermost center of a human being and the innermost center of God's existence or creation is the same. So, that's why it is called the realization of God means realization of the self and vice versa. All of the universe came into existence from the same point, the zero, through the process of evolution. Similarly, man's existence too developed from the same point, from the center. Before the time of creation, the only thing in existence was the root cause, and the entire whole universe, as we see it today, was merged in it in the most subtle form, everything losing its individual identity. So, what was there before creation came into existence? The base was there, and in it, the entire universe was there in the subtle form. Now, the center, like the tiny seed of a tree, included within itself the whole of the universe in the most subtle form. So, a seed of a tree contains, in essence, the entire tree in its bosom. It is not manifest, that's all. But the unmanifested aspect of the tree is there in the seed, in the subtle form. Right? Likewise, the unmanifest form of a human being is there in the zygote. An egg is fertilized by the sperm and it forms a zygote, which is a single cell thing. Now, that zygote, in essence, contains all the manifestations of the human being. The entire body, the structure, the function, everything is there in the subtlest form in the zygote. Like the seed contains the entire essence of the whole tree before it manifests. So, what exactly happens to the seed is the seed gives rise to the entire tree as manifesting in due course of time. That is what happens. Okay. So, you can say the seed is unmanifest tree. You can say the tree is manifest seed. That's all it is. Right? Very similarly, the entire creation in its subtle form was embedded in the center. Now, the center, like a tiny seed of a tree, included within itself the whole of the universe in the most subtle form. It was thus extremely abridged form of the same expanded manifestation as we see. Serena. Abridged version of the entire manifestation, or the subtle manifestation of the entire manifestation. Thus, the center, the latent motion, and the entire creation of the most subtle form all combined together as one unit and led to the cause of the creation when the time came. So now, suddenly, is introduced the latent motions. Till now, we were talking about the center and the entire creation in the subtle form. Now, he's put a third thing, which is the latent motion. We'll understand that in due course of time. But just keep the thought in mind. There is a center, there is a latent motion, and the entire creation in the subtle form all were in one unit before the creation came. At the time of creation, everything began to assume the form of existence. Man also assumed his individual existence. So he's not gone into the details of how creation happened, but he's just said what happened. At the time of creation, everything came into existence. Man also came into existence. The consciousness of individuality was the first covering of the composition of man. I keep saying the idea of sad. You remember? The idea of separateness. That is what Babuji calls as the consciousness of individuality. It is nothing but the idea of separateness. That is the first covering of the man. Further additions continued one after the other, and egoism began to develop and ultimately assumed a grosser form. The working of the mind, the senses, and the faculties began to contribute their share towards the grossness. Actions of the body and the mind led to the formation of samskaras. Finally, man, now again, actions of the body and the mind led to the formation of the samskaras. Please remember this. I keep repeating, without the body and the mind, no samskaras can be formed. We interact with everything in this world utilizing the body and the mind, and that is the root cause of samskara formation. A dead person cannot form samskaras. A person whose mind is not evolved cannot form samskaras. A person who is mentally retarded cannot form samskaras. You got the point? So you need to have a good functioning body and the mind to be able to be used for interaction with the external substance or object, and that becomes the basis for samskara formation. Okay. Finally, man now exists in the grossest form, consisting of the outer gross body and the inner fine bodies and coverings. Now, from this outer solid state of existence, we marched right towards the center, passing through finer states one after the other. From the gross body, we come to the mind body or the subtle body, and then to the causal body, growing finer and more subtle at every step and proceeding on to the further dealings with other coverings. The process generally adopted for it is classified under three heads: karma, upasana, and gnana. Upasana here is nothing but bhakti, which offer the common basis for all the different religions and creeds. The four elementary means, sadhana, chatushtaya, adopted for the purpose are almost the same everywhere. So there are four steps in sadhana: viveka, vairagya, shat sampatti, and mukshatva. These are the four stages: viveka, vairagya, shat sampatti, and mukshatva. Yeah. This is the traditional yoga path that Shankaracharya writes about. Chatushtaya means, Chatust means four. Sadhana Chatushtaya means these are the four sadhanas that you do to reach realization or to reach God. So you practice these four limbs to reach God or reality. That is why it is called as sadhana Chatushtaya. Chatushtaya means four. So what are the four? Viveka, Vairagya, Shat Sampatti, and Mukshatva. Shat means six. Shat Sampatti means six things that we actually gather on the way before we go to Mukshatva. We start with Viveka, then go to Vairagya, then go to Shat Sampatti, where we enrich ourselves with these six tools, and then we go to Mukshatva. Shat means six. Okay, please remember this. The first of these sadhana is Viveka or discrimination. We see many things in the world, but when we think of their existence, we find that they are changeable. They are the different forms of Maya, as we generally call them. We are thus inwardly induced to go deeper in order to trace out the root cause. Our attention is thus diverted from transitory things to that which is unchanging or eternal. Worldly objects thus begin to lose their charm, and we feel in a way unattached to them. This is Viveka. This brings us to the state of Vairagya. In other words, in Viveka, we differentiate between things which are changing versus things which are permanent. So we gradually lose interest in the things which are changing and allow the mind to flow towards the thing which is supposed to be permanent. This is Viveka. This brings us to the state of Vairagya, renunciation, which is known as the second of the four sadhanas. The state of Vairagya is also brought about by certain other causes too. For example, when we are fed up with worldly objects, After indulging in them to our heart's content, we sometimes begin to feel an inward repulsion towards them. In such cases, our attention is naturally diverted towards some other object or nobler ideal, and we feel a bit awakened to godly thought. Secondly, when we have been deeply pricked by the treachery or faithlessness of the world, we feel disgusted and inwardly averse to worldly things. A feeling of dissatisfaction or detachment also develops when we are in a state of bereavement on account of death of some dear ones. But Vairagya created under such circumstances are seldom genuine and lasting. It soon disappears with the change of the adverse circumstance. So that is that Vairagya that comes because of the loss of a dear ones is called as Smashana Vairagya. So you go to the Smashana and then come back, you are totally detached now, temporarily. And then you come and have homemade cooked food for 4 days, all the Vairagya is gone. Serena. That's why by the time we finish the rituals on the 13th day, we are back to square one. We forget about all the loss, everything. In fact, the 13th day is a celebration. We don't even think of it as a loss. 12 days we mourn the loss. 13th day we celebrate that this person, this soul has reached the godly realm. That is why it is called as Vaikunta Samaradhane. Vaikunta Samaradhane is auspicious. The first 12 days is inauspicious. So the 13th day is a celebration that this soul has reached the Vaikunta. That's why we celebrate it as Samaradhane. Adhane. Sama Aradhane. Samaradhane means Sama plus Aradhane. That means it has gone to its original state, Sama. That's why you are actually now celebrating it, Aradhane. Vaikunta Sama Aradhane.
Is it like a sankalpa that we try to do? We don't know if the soul will reach or not by its own, Allah, based on its karma.
We believe that this soul has reached the Vaikunta. Okay. What they do is every time they are taking the dead body, they keep uttering the word Hari, Narayana. If you see some people taking dead body, in North India they keep chanting Ram, Ram, Ram. In Southern India, we actually keep chanting Narayana, Hari and Narayana. In other words, you are reminding the soul of the godly presence, Narayana and Hari. So the soul, whatever it receives, the last thing, it tries to go towards that state. So that's why we keep uttering the word Hari Narayana. Okay, you have to observe all these things. What do they do?
Yeah, but by just saying, how can the soul go there? That's the.
By just saying the soul cannot go because it's kind of tied down by the samskaras. That's correct. But you put a positive spin to it. In other words, you want to kind of see what the soul can actually make out of the Hari and Narayana that it is being reminded of. You will understand it a bit better when we will come to the perceptor work. What would be the impact of uttering certain things at a certain critical times in our life? Okay. Suppose you are in the middle of the sea and you are actually being attacked by the crocodile. Okay. And you don't know where to look for help. Now, you utter the word hello. That's the word that comes to you. Help or hello, something you will utter. And somebody who listens to this comes to you for help. Now, there is no guarantee that the help or the hello word that you uttered was anything special. It was just a normal word that you would say anyway. But that saying out loud in a certain way in the critical moment actually brought some help to you. Got the point? So likewise, when the soul is departing the body, it's a critical moment. So when those words are allowed, there is a hope that some critical help comes in for the journey of the soul. Like when you utter the word hello or help loudly, You are hoping that some help comes in. It's very similar hope that a person has when some dear ones are lost, that they keep better in this particular world. Okay, it helps in reminding the soul of the godly realm also. But the person who is uttering it, the soul is not uttering it. It is the other person who is uttering it, who is still alive. That person has a hope that this soul might be able to benefit. But there is no guarantee that the soul will benefit. But it's a hope that it might benefit. Like you have a hope that by shouting out loud help or hello, you might be able to get some help. Got the point? So something very similar. There is a story which relates to a certain man wanted to see Kabir Das. When he reached his house, he was informed that Kabir Das had gone with a funeral party to the cremation ground to burn the body of one of his deceased relatives. The man proceeded to the cremation ground to see him there, but as he had never seen him before, he thought it might be difficult to recognize Kabir Das among the party. For this purpose, he was told that he should look to a halo around everybody's face. The halo around the face of each one of the party would be found glowing as he proceeded towards the cremation road, but would grow dimmer and dimmer and finally disappear as they returned. Only the halo around Kabir's face would remain glowing all through with equal luster. So this was a sign given to this person. In other words, the halo was brighter when they were there in the uh, cremation ground because they had developed vairagya. As they come towards home, the halo decreased because that vairagya is now gone. They are back towards thinking of materiality. The halo now disappears. Okay, it's a very symbolic representation. Thus, the feeling of vairagya, actuated by such sudden causes, is generally short-lived and changes with the change of circumstance. For though the sudden shock temporarily creates a feeling of vairagya, the seed of desires and enjoyments still lies buried deep within the heart and may sprout forth immediately when it finds a congenial atmosphere. The feeling of vairagya, in the true sense and with lasting results, can only be found developed after thorough cleaning and due moderation. So, the means of developing vairagya is thorough cleaning and due moderation. Those are the means by which we can develop vairagya. Vedantists practice vairagya in a different way. They force their imagination to believe that everything they see is Maya, hence transitory or false, and conclude that the reality is at the bottom is Brahman. They apply their power of will to strengthen this thought so much that they get habituated to it, causing a modification in outward action and habits only. Hence, the effect is mostly external. It may, however, after long and continued practice, possibly reflect somewhat inwardly. Similarly, Viveka, actuated by merely forcing of imagination without a touch of practicality, has no sound basis. A close study of the subject will show that really Viveka and Vairagya are not the means, sadhanas, but the results of our practices. Results of some means. Viveka and Vairagya are the states of mind developed at different stages by constant practice of certain yogas or sadhanas, remembrance, devotion, or love. So although we call it as a sadhana, they themselves are an output of some other sadhana that we do. Okay. Now, Viveka, in the true sense, never develops unless the senses are thoroughly purified. That's why cleaning is important. This happens only when the mind gets properly regulated and disciplined, and egoism assumes a purified form. Thus, is it that Viveka is in fact the result of practices followed in order to bring about the desired results. Now, Vairagya, the second sadhana of the Vedantis, is likewise the result of the Viveka. They act thus as the stages of preliminary attainment of in yoga and not the sadhana or means of attainment of the stages. So, they are preliminary attainments in the path of yoga. Viveka and Vairagya. First, we get Viveka and then Vairagya. When do we get Viveka? When the mind becomes regulated and loses its undisciplined nature. Then we get Viveka. In that Viveka, the senses, the egoism goes into a very fine purified state and the senses become thoroughly purified. These are the three things that happens when we get Viveka. When Viveka comes, automatically the Vairagya also comes as a secondary impact of the Viveka. Okay. I think everyone is feeling sleepy. I don't see others. Varun, Nitin, Sanat, oh, they are still there. Sanat ಅಂತೂ ನಿದ್ದೆ ಹೋಗಿರ್ತಾನೆ.
Yeah, I'm listening to you.
ಓ, ಇನ್ನೂ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ.
Yeah.
ನೀನ್ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ನಿದ್ದೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಡ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡೆ ನಾನು. ಸರಿ. In the Sahajmarg system of yoga, Viveka and Vairagya are not treated as sadhanas, but are left aside to be developed automatically by an aspirant during his progress. Okay? So how do we treat Viveka and Vairagya? We don't take it up separately. It is something that happens or develops automatically. It starts from what is known as the third sadhana of Vedantis, which consists of 6 forms of spiritual attainment known as Shat Sampattis. So in Sahaj Marg, we start with Shat Sampatti, which is the third stage of the sadhana chatushtaya. The first of the Sampattis is called Sham, which pertains to the peaceful condition of the mind, leading to a state of calmness and tranquility. When we practice it, Viveka and Vairagya follows automatically. So in Sahaj Marg, we start with the Shat Sampatti. If you practice Sham, then Viveka and Vairagya automatically comes. This is something that they'll ask you in the examination about Shat Sampatti, about Sham, about Sadhana Chatushtaya. These are very common standard questions. Okay? Vairagya, in the sense of non-existence of things, is in my opinion a very difficult process, for in it you have to take up a negative course and discard or reject everything that comes to your view. But if you take up a positive view and accept one thing only as real, sticking to it wholeheartedly, other things will naturally fall into the background, and by we become unmindful of them. So in Sahaj Marg, Vairagya is developed in a positive state, positive bent. Normally, Vedantis try to develop Vairagya by a negative bent. They go on discarding everything as part of Maya. That's a negative way of doing it. But here in Sahaj Marg, we stick to something what is real. So that which is unreal gradually will cease to have any hold on the mind of the Abhyasi. Consequently, your attainment with them will be gradually begin to disappear, and you will gain Vairagya by the easiest means. Thus, the preliminary thing in yoga is the proper regulation of the mind, which is ever restless. So in order to develop Vairagya, we attach ourselves towards the reality. Vairagya automatically develops. In this way, we actually regulate the mind. It creates numerous ideas and thoughts, so the mind creates numerous ideas and thoughts, imparts stimulus to the senses and faculties, and sets the body into action. Everything good or evil originates from the mind, and it is the mind alone which governs all our feelings, emotions, and impulses. So, how important it is to regulate the mind is now being spoken about. Everything that we do or we feel, the energy, everything is related to the mind only. Thinkers have classified the tendencies of the mind under 5 heads. This is also an examination question. The first of these is known as kshipta, is a disturbed condition of the mind, including all feelings such as hunger, thirst, anger, sorrow, desires for wealth, and fame. Kshipta. That's the first stage of the mind. First tendency. The second one is called as mudha. Includes tendency which promotes sluggishness, indolence, or sloth. Mudha is the one who actually tell others to worship stones, trees, bhutas, pretas. They are called as mudha. Okay, they increase sluggishness or indolence. The third is vikshipta, pertains to the tendency which drives the mind away from sacred thoughts and brings about the haunting of numerous irrelevant ideas at the time of meditation. So when an Abhyasi tells after the meditation, I was bombarded by thoughts and I was totally disturbed, that state of mind is nothing but vikshipta state of mind. Got the point? We actually see all these things in our experience, but we don't necessarily recognize it and talk about it. So when an Abhyasi says, I felt restless throughout the session of meditation, I was being bombarded by thoughts, it is nothing but the vikshipta state of mind. That's all. Okay. Then the fourth is ekagra vritti, is the tendency which makes the mind fix attention on one thing only. That is the ekagra vritti. Ekagra means on one thing only. Eka means one, agra means focused on one. Ekagra vritti. So that's the tendency. The mind has a tendency to be stabilized on one thing only. That is called as ekagra vritti. Vritti means tendency. Eka agra means one only. Eka means one, stabilized on that only. So eka agra vritti. Okay, that's the fourth state. The last one is niruddha, is the tendency which brings the mind to a perfectly self-contained state free from complexities and disturbances. This is exactly the state that we are going towards in meditation. We are going towards the niruddha state of the mind. What is that state? The mind comes to a perfectly self-contained state free from complexities and disturbances. To achieve this last stage, sages have generally advised the well-known Ashtanga Yoga. So to achieve the fifth state of the mind of these five tendencies, sages have advised the Ashtanga Yoga. Under the Sahajamara system of training, we start from dhyana, the seventh step of meditation, fixing our mind on the point in order to practice meditation. So we don't take all the other previous steps. In that way, we actually save time. The previous steps are not taken up separately, but they automatically come into practice as we proceed on with meditation. Thus, much of our time and labor is saved by this means. Okay? So please remember this. In Sahajmar, we take up the seventh step of Ashtanga Yoga, which is meditation. Okay? And Viveka Vairagya is also not taken up. They all come automatically when we take. In Sahajmar, we take up the sixth Shat Sampatis, which is the third form of Sadhana Chatushtaya. And in that, the first one is Sham. From the Sham itself, we get Viveka Vairagya. In short, we start our presence practice from Sham, the first of the six sampatis of the third sadhana of the Vedantis, and devote all our attention to the proper molding and regulation of the mind, which is easily accomplished by the transmitted power of a worthy master. Control of the senses or indriyas or dhamma follows automatically when we fix our mind on one thing and one alone, which is the reality, ignoring all others. Generally, most of the sages follow this course. So the second of the Shat Sampati is Dhamma. Sham is the first one, second one is Dhamma. Shama, Dhamma. So what is Shama? It is there in the previous page. Shama pertains to the peaceful condition of the mind, leading to a state of calmness and tranquility. It's a state of calmness and tranquility, a peaceful state of mind, peaceful disposition of the mind to stay in a tranquil and calm state. After Shama comes Dhamma. Once Shama comes in, what happens is the control of the indriyas and the senses becomes automatic, and that is Dhamma. And that happens because we fix our attention onto the one thing which is the reality. A few of the sects attempt to approach to Sham through the practice of karma, others through devotion or bhakti. There are still others who set aside both of these and proceed on through the medium of jnana. In fact, the stages of karma, jnana, and upasana are not different from each other, but are closely interrelated and exist all through in one and the same state. For example, in upasana, which means in devotion, controlling the mind is karma, the controlled state of the mind is upasana, and its consciousness is jnana. So, Babaji writes that all the three are always existent, one next to the other. In jnana, the process of thinking is karma, staying on the thought out object is upasana, and the resultant state is jnana. While in karma, the resolve to act is karma, the process of bringing it into practice is upasana, and the consciousness of the achievement is jnana. So, in other words, they all the three coexist, one next to other. Thus, it is that in our system of training, they are taken up all together most efficiently, creating automatically the state of Viveka and Vairagya in the true sense. No practice is really of any avail if it does not naturally result in Viveka and Vairagya. The real form of Viveka is when a man begins to realize his own defects and shortcomings, and at the bottom of his heart feels repentant for the same. That is Viveka. Another definition of Viveka. The man recognizes his own shortcomings and defects and feels repentant about them. We have dealt with the first two sampattis. We now come to the third, known as uparati, which means self-withdrawal. Self-withdrawal also is related to pratyahara. If you remember, we read pratyahara. Pratyahara means self-withdrawal. Uparati is also with self-withdrawal only. In this sense, a man is free of all desires, even those pertaining to the next world. Neither they want this world nor the next world. They don't have desire for anything. He is not charmed by or attracted by anything in the world. His mind is all the time centered in one, the real. It is different from the state of vairagya in the sense that vairagya produces a feeling of aversion for worldly objects, while uparati is a state in which both the feelings of attraction and repulsion are absent. So they'll ask you the difference between vairagya and uparati. In vairagya, we feel aversion to the external objects. In uparati, neither we feel aversion nor any attraction towards the object. So it's a more mature state of vairagya. Vairagya is really an incomplete form of the nobler higher state of uparati. At this stage, our mind, senses, and indriyas are completely purified, and we begin to feel fed up with all the external things and dissociate from them, thinking them not to be worthwhile paying any attention to them. We are free from the effects of attachment with the world. Even the comforts of paradise has no charm to such a man, nor does he feel any attraction for salvation, liberation, or any other higher ideals. Because the mind is aligned to reality. It's only going towards reality. All other states, salvation, liberation, is of no charm to this particular person. This is the effect of uparati. Okay? Viveka versus uparati. Uparati versus pratyahara. You can get questions along these lines. Okay? The fourth sampati is titiksha, or a state of fortitude. At this stage, a man is perfectly satisfied with what is allotted to him by God. So he is perfectly satisfied and content. He has no feeling of injury, insult, condemnation, or appreciation. So that is titiksha. The fifth one is shraddha or faith, which is a very high attainment. It is very different from the preliminary state of the artificial faith as discussed in the chapter entitled Faith. The last one is samadhan, which is the state of self-settledness on the will of the master without even being conscious of it. At this stage, a man is perfectly devoted to the great master without any thought besides. Samadhana. Settled on the thought of on the will of the great master. That is samadhana. So I'll just repeat the Shat Sampatis: Shama, Dama, Uparati, Titiksha, then Shraddha, and then Samadhana. Just remember these things: Shama, Dama, Uparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, and Samadhana. Okay, this is something that you might get as a question in your examination. So I think I'll just stop here. It's coming up to 10:28. We can stop here and then we can continue next session from here. After the Shat Sampatis, we now go to the next part after that. Okay.
Almost at the end of realization.
So we just have another few more pages. I think we should be able to finish it in the next session. Okay. I've given you indication of the questions that you will get. Sadhana Chaturchaya you might get. Shat Sampati you might get. Which part that Sahaj mark start in the Sadhana Chaturchaya you might get. Which part or Anga that the Sahaj mark starts in Ashtanga Yoga you might get. Which part the Shat Sampati gives rise to Viveka Vairagya you might get. What is the relationship between Vairagya and Uparati? What is the relationship between Uparati and Pratyahara? Even that you might get. These are all the questions that you will get most likely from the chapter on realization. Apart from this chapter on realization, where he has elaborated on Sadhana Chatushtaya and Shat Sampati, in no other place Babuji writes about it. So, if at all it is coming in the exam, it's always coming from this book, the realization chapter in Reality at Dawn. Please remember. Okay. So, since it's an open book exam, if you know at least where it is, you will be able to just go there and write the answer. Got the point? Okay, Pagare. Thank you very much to all of you for joining in. It's late night, but still you have joined. Good. We will catch up tomorrow again. I'll just message if I do have the time and space for a session tomorrow. I'll message you. Maybe between 8 and 9 tomorrow we can have. Okay. We'll try and do it. Or I might have another meeting between 8 and 8:30. Maybe between 8:30 and 9:15 we can have. 9:15 I have another meeting. Okay, but I'll message you what time. Okay, good night then. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking it up late.
Bye then.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.